The air in the conference room crackled, not with the usual Monday morning buzz of caffeine and anticipated updates, but with a brittle, icy tension. It radiated outwards from one man, Rick Sterling, my boss, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the polished mahogany table. His gaze, usually darting and dismissive, was fixed, sharp, and unnerving. It wasn't his usual look of harried authority, it was something colder, more deliberate. A predator's focus. I stood near the projector, my laptop open, the presentation I'd sacrificed my weekend for cued and ready. Years of dedication, countless late nights coaxing life into complex systems, mentoring junior engineers until they blossomed, it all felt condensed into this single, poised moment before I shared our latest triumph. I represented the culmination of effort, the quiet engine driving progress. He thought he ended my career right there, in that sterile room filled with the stunned faces of my colleagues. But I came back, and when I did, I ended his. 1 minute, I was Mia Serrano, lead systems architect at Innovate Solutions, the dependable cornerstone of the tech department, the one who solved the problems others couldn't, the one who consistently, quietly, delivered. I wasn't angling for the spotlight, the intricate beauty of a perfectly functioning system was reward enough. My work spoke for itself, a symphony of logic and efficiency humming beneath the surface of the company's operations. I had poured my intellect, my creativity, and frankly, my life, into building something meaningful here. The next minute, I was a pariah, dismissed with a chilling lack of ceremony, a public spectacle designed purely to inflate a fragile male ego. Rick's words sliced through the expectant silence. Before we begin, there's been a change. We've decided to let Mia go. Just like that. No warning. No private conversation. No shred of professional courtesy, let alone human dignity. Just the collective gasp, the averted eyes, the sudden, suffocating weight of humiliation pressing down on me. He hadn't just fired me, he'd tried to erase me, to make an example of me in front of the very people I'd trained and supported. He wanted them to see what happened when someone, especially a woman, shone too brightly without his explicit permission. He wanted them to fear him. But instead of crumbling, instead of validating his power play with tears or pleas, something else ignited within me. A cold, hard resolve crystallized in the pit of my stomach, extinguishing the initial shock. As I walked out of that building, head held high despite the trembling in my hands, the echo of slamming doors wasn't an ending. It was a starting gun. I came back. Not as an employee seeking reinstatement, not as a victim seeking pity. I came back as the owner. I walked through those same doors, months later, the scent of possibility replacing the stench of betrayal. And the very first item on my agenda? It wasn't restructuring logistics or reviewing financials, though those were critical. No, the first act was symbolic. Necessary. I walked into his office, the same office from which he'd orchestrated my downfall, the one with the ridiculously oversized leather chair meant to signify importance. He looked up, startled, confusion warring with his innate arrogance. And I uttered the words, mirroring his own cold dismissal, but imbued with the weight of earned authority. We're restructuring, Rick. Your position has been terminated. The color drained from his face. The power dynamic, so violently skewed that fateful Monday, had irrevocably, deliciously, reversed. This isn't just a revenge fantasy brought to life, though the satisfaction was undeniably potent. This is the true story of how I meticulously transformed profound betrayal into an undeniable comeback. It's the story of leveraging intellect, resilience, and strategic alliances. It's proof, etched in the corporate ledger and the stunned faces of those who doubted, that you should never, ever underestimate a woman with a meticulously crafted plan and the sheer force of will to execute it. Let me take you back, not just to the day it imploded, but to the foundations upon which my career at Innovate Solutions was built. It wasn't a sprawling, impersonal tech giant like the monoliths dominating Silicon Valley, but a mid-sized firm nestled in a burgeoning tech hub, pulsing with potential. Innovate Solutions, the name itself promised progress, forward momentum. Founded a decade earlier by two idealistic engineers who had since taken more advisory roles, it had carved out a niche in bespoke data management systems for complex industries, finance, biotech, logistics. Its future felt bright, tangible, something you could almost taste in the optimistic chatter by the coffee machine. And within that promising ecosystem, I was the lead systems architect. It sounds technical, perhaps dry, but for me, it was creation. I designed and implemented the intricate digital scaffolding that held the entire company's operations aloft. The databases, the server configurations, the security protocols, the APIs that allowed different software components to communicate seamlessly, that was my domain. When a client needed a system that could handle millions of real-time transactions without faltering, I built the back end. When our internal processes became bottlenecked, I re-engineered the workflow. When new engineers joined, bright-eyed but bewildered by the complexity, I was the one who patiently walked them through the architecture, translating arcane code into understandable concepts. I wasn't just maintaining systems, I was evolving them, ensuring they were robust, scalable, and secure. My style wasn't about grand pronouncements or seeking applause in meetings. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor did I crave the superficial validation that came with flashy presentations filled with buzzwords. My satisfaction came from the quiet hum of a perfectly optimized server, the elegant efficiency of well-written code, the tangible results my work produced for our clients and our bottom line. I focused on substance over style, on solutions over self-promotion. I believed, perhaps naively, that competence and dedication were their own reward, that consistent, high-quality delivery would inevitably be recognized and valued. And for a long time, it seemed to be. My performance reviews were stellar. Colleagues frequently sought my expertise. Clients specifically requested my involvement in complex projects. The engineers I mentored looked up to me, respecting my knowledge and my calm, methodical approach to problem-solving. The evidence was undeniable. I was good at my job. Exceptionally good. The results were visible in system uptime statistics, in successful project deployments, in positive client feedback. Everyone saw it, acknowledged it, benefited from it. Everyone, that is, except the one person whose validation, professionally speaking, mattered most, my direct supervisor, Rick Sterling. Rick had joined Innovate Solutions about 3 years prior, parachuted into a leadership role through connections rather than demonstrable merit, or so the rumor mill whispered. He possessed a certain superficial charm, the kind that impressed executives in short bursts but wore thin under the pressure of daily operations. He talked a good game about vision and disruption, but when technical details arose, his eyes glazed over. He managed upwards brilliantly, ensuring the board saw only curated successes, often subtly taking credit for the team's achievements while deflecting blame for any setbacks. Rick was the epitome of the insecure manager, the kind whose sense of self-worth was directly tied to his perceived dominance in the workplace hierarchy. And nothing threatened that fragile ego more than competence he couldn't control, particularly when it resided in a woman. He couldn't compete with my technical expertise, so he sought to diminish it. My quiet focus wasn't interpreted as dedication, but as aloofness. My ability to solve problems he couldn't grasp wasn't seen as an asset to his team, but as an implicit critique of his leadership. I wasn't actively competing with him, my goal was the success of the project, the company. But in his zero-sum worldview, my success somehow detracted from his own. He saw my competence not as a team strength, but as a personal affront, a silent challenge to his authority. The signs were there, subtle at first, easily dismissed as personality quirks or managerial ineptitude. Being overlooked for key meetings despite leading the relevant project. Having my carefully considered technical recommendations casually overridden with ill-conceived alternatives. Finding my contributions vaguely attributed to the team in reports where his name featured prominently. Occasional condescending remarks masked as jokes during team lunches. Each incident, taken alone, was perhaps minor, deniable. But together, they painted a picture of a man actively, deliberately trying to undermine me, to keep me contained. He couldn't outshine me on merit, so he resorted to playing dirty, leveraging his positional power to create friction and doubt. And I, focused on the work, perhaps underestimated the venom brewing beneath his polished veneer. Until that one Monday morning, when the microaggressions and subtle sabotage escalated into a full-blown, public execution. He didn't just dislike my competence, he feared it. And one day, that fear curdled into malice, and he snapped. The Monday morning meeting. It was a company ritual, a weekly alignment where department heads presented updates, celebrated wins, and addressed challenges. Usually, it was a standard affair: coffee, slightly stale pastries, a slideshow of metrics and milestones. But this Monday felt different, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was Rick's unusually curt emails the previous week, or the way he'd avoided eye contact in the hallway on Friday. Or perhaps it was just the residual exhaustion from the marathon weekend I'd just endured. I had spent nearly 48 hours refining the deployment strategy for Project Nightingale, our most ambitious undertaking yet, a complete overhaul of the core architecture for our flagship financial services client. It was complex, high-stakes work, involving migrating massive datasets and ensuring zero downtime during the transition. I hadn't just overseen it, I'd been deep in the trenches, writing code, running simulations, triple-checking every dependency. I felt the satisfying weariness of intense, productive effort. My presentation was ready, clear, concise, showcasing the elegant solution we'd devised and outlining the meticulous rollout plan. I felt prepared, confident even, ready to share the culmination of months of teamwork, much of it spearheaded by my designs. The conference room filled gradually. Faces I knew well, Sarah from marketing, with her perpetually optimistic smile, Ben, the quiet head of QA, already nursing his second coffee, the junior engineers I'd mentored, nervously shuffling their notepads. And, of course, Rick, presiding at the head of the table, his posture unnaturally stiff, his usual forced bonhomie absent. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering momentarily on me before flitting away. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. As the clock ticked over to 9 a.m., a hush fell over the room. I moved towards the front, ready to connect my laptop to the projector. I smiled briefly at Anya, my most trusted senior engineer, who gave me a subtle thumbs up. We'd conquered Nightingale together. This presentation was our victory lap. But before my fingers could even touch the cable, Rick cleared his throat, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the stillness. Before we begin, he announced, his voice devoid of its usual feigned warmth, replaced by a chilling flatness. There's been a change in our staffing structure. A collective intake of breath. Staffing changes were usually handled privately, discreetly. An announcement like this, in this forum, was unprecedented. My hand hovered over my laptop. Rick continued, his eyes sweeping across the room before landing squarely on me, pinning me in place. Effective immediately, we've decided to let Mia Serrano go. Silence. Utter, profound, suffocating silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an unbearable eternity. My brain struggled to process the words, to connect them to reality. Let Mia go. It sounded clinical, detached, like discussing obsolete hardware, not a dedicated employee who had poured years of her life into this company. I could feel every single eye in that room turn towards me. Not with sympathy, but with a mixture of shock, confusion, and perhaps a dawning fear, if she could be discarded so easily, who was safe? Sarah's optimistic smile vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Ben stared down at his coffee cup, unable to meet my gaze. Anya looked horrified, her hand half-raised as if to protest, then falling back into her lap, silenced by the sheer brutality of the act. My own body felt distant, disconnected. I was floating, observing the scene unfold. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the frantic pounding of my own heart. Frozen, yet hyper-aware. The carefully prepared slides for Project Nightingale seemed to mock me from my laptop screen. A voice, thin and unfamiliar, broke the silence. It took me a moment to realize it was my own. Why? The word hung in the air, fragile yet demanding. Rick met my question not with an explanation, but with a performance of nonchalance. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that negated years of my work, my commitment. It's a business decision, Mia. Restructuring for future growth. Bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. There was no restructuring plan discussed, no prior warning, no performance issues documented. My last review had been glowing. Project Nightingale was poised for success, largely due to my architecture. This wasn't a strategic move, it was a public execution. I knew it instantly, with sickening clarity. This was Rick asserting his dominance in the most primitive way possible. He couldn't outcompete me, so he eliminated me. He needed to quell any perception that I held influence, that my technical prowess rivaled his positional authority. He needed to show the team, in the most brutal fashion imaginable, who held the power. And he used me, the competent, non-confrontational woman who just kept delivering results, as the sacrificial lamb on the altar of his insecurity. He wasn't just firing an employee, he was trying to break a spirit, to send a chilling message to anyone, especially any woman, who dared to excel without constantly bowing to his ego. The humiliation wasn't a byproduct, it was the entire point. Walking out of that conference room, and subsequently the Innovate Solutions building for what I assumed was the last time, was one of the longest journeys of my life. Each step echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence that followed Rick's pronouncement. The curated neutrality of the office decor, the motivational posters preaching teamwork, the potted plants struggling under fluorescent lights seemed like a cruel joke. I didn't run. I didn't stumble. I gathered the few personal items from my desk, a framed photo, a favorite mug, a worn copy of a programming textbook, with deliberate, measured movements, acutely aware of the furtive glances and hushed whispers trailing in my wake. I wouldn't give Rick the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I walked out with my head held high, spine straight, projecting an image of composure I was far from feeling. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, I wasn't dissolving into sadness or despair. Shock, yes. A profound sense of injustice, absolutely. But overwhelming those initial waves was something else, something potent and unfamiliar, a cold, diamond-hard fury. It wasn't the messy, tearful anger of victimhood. It was a focused, burning rage, the kind that doesn't lash out wildly, but instead channels itself, solidifies into pure, unadulterated resolve. He hadn't broken me. He had inadvertently forged me into something stronger, something he would learn to regret. You see, Rick's fatal error, beyond his spectacular display of toxic leadership, was his ignorance. He saw me only as Mia, the systems architect, the quiet coder, the reliable cog in his machine. He had no idea about the other Mia, the one who existed outside the confines of Innovate Solutions, the one who had been quietly, diligently investing in herself for years. What Rick didn't know was that my ambition hadn't been confined to mastering complex codebases. For the past 18 months, fueled by a growing sense that I was capable of more, that my potential was being stifled even before his overt antagonism began, I had been meticulously laying the groundwork for a different future. It started subtly. I began taking on small, discrete consulting projects on the side, helping startups architect their initial cloud infrastructure, advising nonprofits on database optimization. These weren't just for extra income, they were reconnaissance missions into the wider business world, opportunities to test my skills in different contexts and build an independent reputation. Simultaneously, I enrolled in evening classes at the local university's business school. Corporate finance, strategic management, business law, subjects that felt a world away from algorithms and data structures, yet increasingly vital. I devoured textbooks, participated in case study discussions, learned the language of balance sheets, market analysis, and investor relations. It was exhausting, juggling a demanding full-time job with rigorous coursework and consulting gigs, stealing hours from sleep and weekends. But it was also exhilarating. Each new concept I grasped, each successful consulting outcome, added another layer to my skill set, broadened my perspective beyond the purely technical. My motivation hadn't been a concrete plan to leave Innovate Solutions, not initially. It stemmed from a deeper yearning for growth, a desire to understand the entire ecosystem in which my technical work existed. I wanted to speak the language of the executives, to grasp the financial levers that drove decisions, to contribute not just to the how but also to the what and why of the business. I wanted more than just a seat at the table. I wanted to understand how the table was built and who decided who got invited. I saw colleagues, often less technically adept but more politically savvy, climbing the ladder, and I realized technical brilliance alone wasn't enough. I needed strategic acumen. Rick's public execution, his clumsy attempt to diminish me, didn't extinguish that ambition. Instead, it poured gasoline on the embers. He hadn't just fired me, he had liberated me. He had severed the ties holding me to a path that was already feeling too narrow. He had inadvertently handed me the catalyst, the unavoidable push I needed to stop preparing for someday and start chasing now. So, while Rick was likely back in that conference room, basking in the nervous silence he'd created, perhaps congratulating himself on removing a perceived threat and consolidating his power, my mind was already racing miles ahead. The humiliation stung, yes, but the anger was a cleaner, more useful fuel. As I walked away from the Innovate Solutions building, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by the hum of strategic thought. The pieces I had been gathering, the skills, the knowledge, the network, suddenly clicked into place. He thought he had banished me to the professional wilderness. He had no idea I was already drawing maps, planning my route, and preparing to build an entirely new kingdom. While he celebrated his petty victory, I was already architecting my comeback. And this time, I wasn't just building a system. I was planning a siege. The first 24 hours were a blur of forced calm and internal chaos. I fielded concerned calls from former colleagues, the brave ones, deflected parental worry with vague assurances, and updated my resume with a grim sense of necessity. The injustice gnawed at me, the sheer audacity of Rick's move. But beneath the surface turmoil, the cold resolve held firm. The anger wasn't dissipating, it was clarifying. It wasn't enough to just find another job, to land on my feet. That would be letting him win. No, this required a response proportionate to the offense. This required flipping the entire board. On Tuesday morning, nursing a strong coffee and staring at the city skyline from my apartment window, I made the call I knew I needed to make. I dialed Eleanor Vance. Eleanor wasn't just a former manager from early in my career, she was a force of nature. A sharp, seasoned executive who had navigated the treacherous currents of the corporate world for decades, emerging with her integrity intact and a reputation for spotting and nurturing talent. She'd seen my potential long before I fully recognized it myself, often pushing me to think bigger. Her parting words when she left that previous company to start her own consultancy had stuck with me. "Mia, you have the intellect of a top-tier engineer and the strategic mind of a CEO. Why are you still content building engines when you could be designing the whole vehicle?" I laid it all out for her, the years of dedication at Innovate, Rick's escalating insecurity, the meticulously planned projects, the public humiliation of the firing, the flimsy business decision excuse. I didn't need to embellish, the bare facts were damning enough. I also told her about my night classes, the consulting work, the simmering desire for something more that had predated Rick's final act. Eleanor listened patiently, her silence punctuated only by occasional, sharp intakes of breath or a low murmur of disapproval at Rick's behavior. When I finally finished, breathless and raw, there was a pause. Then, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel, "Well, Mia. He picked the wrong woman to underestimate. Profoundly foolish of him. So, the question isn't if you fight back, but how. Let's show them what you're really made of." That conversation was the spark that ignited the wildfire. Eleanor, with her vast network and strategic brain, became my de facto chief strategist. We didn't just commiserate, we immediately pivoted to action. We spent hours whiteboarding in her sleek downtown office, fueled by more coffee and a shared sense of righteous purpose. We mapped out Innovate Solutions' weaknesses: Rick's alienation of key talent, his focus on short-term appearances over long-term stability, the whispers of board dissatisfaction I'd occasionally overheard. We identified potential leverage points. The strategy began to take shape, audacious yet calculated. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Rick, it was about rescuing the company from his mismanagement and realizing its original potential. The first step was reconnaissance and coalition building. Armed with Eleanor's guidance and my own intimate knowledge of the company, I began reaching out, carefully, discreetly. First, to former clients. Not the current ones, that would be too risky, but companies I had worked with successfully in the past, relationships built on trust and proven results. I framed the conversations carefully, inquiring about their current challenges, subtly reminding them of the quality of work delivered when I was involved, gauging their perception of Innovate Solutions' recent trajectory. The feedback was often telling, polite but hinting at slower response times, less innovative solutions since my departure. Seeds of doubt were sown. Next, I tapped into the network I'd built through my consulting work and business classes. I needed potential investors, people who understood the tech landscape and might be willing to back a bold move if the numbers made sense. Eleanor made crucial introductions. I pitched my vision not as a personal vendetta, but as a sound business opportunity, a company with solid fundamentals, currently undervalued due to weak leadership, ripe for a turnaround spearheaded by someone with deep technical knowledge and a fresh strategic perspective. I prepared meticulous presentations, showcasing my understanding of Innovate's potential and outlining a clear path to increased profitability and innovation. Perhaps the most delicate operation was reaching out to potential allies within Innovate Solutions. I knew there were others frustrated by Rick's arrogance and erratic decision-making. Anya, my senior engineer, was devastated by my firing and furious at Rick. Ben from QA, outwardly quiet, was meticulous and deeply principled. He'd subtly flagged concerns about corners being cut under Rick's pressure. There were others, too, in sales and operations, who felt undervalued and ignored. I approached them cautiously, through back channels, meeting for coffee far from the office, speaking hypothetically at first. What if, I'd pose, there was a way to bring better leadership to Innovate? It was a high-wire act. A leak could be catastrophic. But the dissatisfaction with Rick was more profound than I'd even realized. Several key people, disillusioned by his leadership and loyal to the company's original vision, and perhaps, to me, agreed to provide discreet information. They confirmed that morale was plummeting. Talented engineers were polishing their resumes. Crucially, they corroborated the rumors about the board's growing unease. Rick was apparently missing targets, his explanations wearing thin. The board, composed of the original founders and a couple of cautious venture capitalists, wasn't thrilled with the direction he was taking the company. They respected the legacy, but Rick's ego-driven decisions were starting to impact the bottom line and, more importantly, the company's reputation. They just didn't know they had a viable alternative. They saw Rick as a necessary evil, perhaps, or were paralyzed by indecision. Until, that is, I started building the case to give them one. A compelling, well-funded, strategically sound alternative. The comeback wasn't just beginning, it was gaining momentum, piece by painstaking piece. The transition from strategizing to execution was intense. Building a coalition of disgruntled employees and sympathetic clients was one thing. Orchestrating a full-fledged buyout of a company, even a mid-sized one like Innovate Solutions, was a monumental undertaking that pushed me far beyond my technical comfort zone. This was where my night classes in corporate finance and strategy moved from theoretical knowledge to practical application, and where Eleanor's mentorship proved invaluable. Together, with a small, trusted team consisting of Eleanor, a sharp M&A lawyer she recommended, and a forensic accountant who could dissect Innovate's financials with surgical precision, we worked relentlessly. My apartment transformed into a war room, littered with spreadsheets, market analyses, legal drafts, and endless cups of coffee. Sleep became a luxury. We analyzed Innovate's valuation, cash flow, debt structure, and intellectual property portfolio. We identified Rick's strategic blunders, missed market opportunities, underinvestment in R&D, and over-reliance on a few key clients while alienating others. Our goal wasn't just to acquire the company, it was to present an offer the board couldn't easily refuse, one that addressed their underlying concerns about Rick's leadership and offered a credible, compelling vision for the future. We secured provisional backing from two strategic investors I'd cultivated, one a venture capital firm Eleanor knew, impressed by my technical background and turnaround plan, the other a wealthy angel investor who had been an early client of Innovate and lamented its recent stagnation. Their support wasn't just financial, it lent significant credibility to our bid. The offer we constructed was aggressive but fair. It proposed a leveraged buyout, structured to provide a reasonable return for existing shareholders, including the somewhat passive founders, while ensuring enough working capital to implement my proposed changes. Crucially, the offer wasn't just numbers on a page. It was accompanied by a detailed strategic plan, the vision document. This document laid out my blueprint for revitalizing Innovate Solutions, refocusing on core technical strengths, investing in employee development, a direct counterpoint to Rick's talent drain, rebuilding client trust, exploring specific new market adjacencies I had identified, and fostering a culture of collaboration and innovation rather than fear. It highlighted my deep understanding of the company's potential, contrasting it implicitly and explicitly with Rick's demonstrated shortcomings. It was a plan built by someone who understood the engine, not just someone who wanted to sit in the driver's seat. The delivery of the offer was handled with calculated precision by our lawyers, presented formally to the board of directors, bypassing Rick entirely. We knew this would likely trigger panic and fury from him, but we also calculated that going directly to the decision-makers was essential. The days that followed were agonizingly tense. We knew the board was meeting, deliberating. Rick, predictably, tried to rally support, likely painting our offer as hostile, opportunistic, or inadequate. We heard through our internal allies that he was scrambling, calling emergency meetings, attempting to discredit me personally and professionally. He probably reminded the board that he had fired me, attempting to frame it as proof of my inadequacy rather than his own poor judgment. But his narrative was losing traction. Our vision document resonated with the founders who missed the company's innovative spark. The venture capitalists on the board, concerned by lagging performance metrics that Rick could no longer spin effectively, saw a chance to protect and grow their investment under new, competent leadership. The quiet allies we had cultivated perhaps spoke up discreetly, confirming the low morale and missed opportunities. Rick's track record, combined with the compelling alternative we presented, tipped the scales. He had alienated too many people, made too many questionable decisions. His ego, which led him to fire me so brazenly, had ultimately become his undoing. The call came late on a Friday afternoon. Eleanor and I were huddled in her office, running through contingency plans. My lawyer's name flashed on my phone. I answered, heart pounding. "Mia," he said, his voice calm but unable to hide a note of triumph. "They accepted." The board voted overwhelmingly in favor. "Congratulations, CEO." A wave of disbelief, then exhilaration, then sheer, terrifying weight washed over me. From fired pariah to CEO-elect in a matter of weeks. The legal formalities, the signing of papers, the transfer of funds happened in a whirlwind. Public announcements were drafted. My return to Innovate Solutions wasn't gradual, it was immediate and definitive. Walking back into that building, not as a dismissed employee but as the new owner and chief executive officer, was surreal. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, rumor, and uncertainty. Some faces showed relief, others apprehension. I addressed the entire company in the same conference room where I'd been humiliated, not with gloating, but with a clear statement of purpose, outlining the vision, acknowledging the recent turbulence, and promising a renewed focus on collaboration, innovation, and respect. But I won't lie. There was one piece of unfinished business that required immediate, personal attention. After the all-hands meeting, I walked down the familiar corridor towards the corner office. Rick's office. He was inside, standing by the window, looking utterly bewildered, blindsided. He turned as I entered, his expression a mixture of defiance and dawning horror. I didn't waste time. I stood before his oversized desk, the symbol of his perceived authority, and kept my voice level, professional, devoid of the fury that had simmered for weeks. "Rick," I began, the words tasting like justice, "as you know, the company is now under new ownership and leadership. We're implementing a new strategic direction, which includes restructuring the executive team." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Effective immediately, your position has been terminated." He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just stared, speechless. The arrogance, the bluster, the carefully constructed facade of power, it all crumbled in an instant, leaving behind a man utterly stripped of his perceived importance. In his mind, I was supposed to be a footnote, a cautionary tale, gone and forgotten. He could not comprehend the reality that I was standing there, holding his fate in my hands. He had tried to extinguish my career to feel powerful. Now, facing the real consequence of his actions, he looked smaller than I could ever have imagined. The satisfaction wasn't just in the words, but in the profound, undeniable shift in power, earned not through ego, but through resilience, strategy, and the courage to fight back. It was the most chillingly satisfying sentence I have ever spoken. The immediate aftermath of the takeover, particularly the firing of Rick, brought a complex mix of emotions. There was, undeniably, a profound sense of vindication. The symmetry was inescapable, the public humiliation reversed, the power dynamic inverted. Seeing the shock on his face, the crumbling of his arrogance, provided a visceral satisfaction that resonated deeply after the injustice I had endured. It felt like balance being restored, not just for me, but for everyone else who had been diminished or dismissed by his ego. However, dwelling solely on revenge felt hollow, insufficient. This journey, this intense, whirlwind battle, had been about far more than settling a personal score. It was about reclaiming agency, proving capability, and fundamentally reshaping a toxic environment. The satisfaction of firing Rick was potent, but the real work, the meaningful work, began the moment he walked out the door. It was about building something better in the space his destructive leadership had occupied. This story, my story, became a microcosm of a much larger narrative, one that plays out far too often in workplaces everywhere. It's the story of what happens when capable, dedicated women are underestimated, overlooked, or actively undermined, simply because their presence or success makes insecure men uncomfortable. It's about the subtle and overt ways female ambition is often discouraged, managed, or punished, particularly in male-dominated fields like technology. Rick wasn't an anomaly, he was a symptom of a system that too often rewards bluster over substance, connections over competence, and conformity over innovation, especially when that innovation comes from an unexpected source. We, as women, are often implicitly taught to shrink ourselves, to moderate our ambitions, to avoid making waves, to manage the egos of those in power rather than challenge them directly. We're encouraged to ask for permission, to wait patiently for recognition that may never come, to accept being relegated to supporting roles even when we possess the skills and vision to lead. My experience was a stark reminder that playing by those unwritten rules, hoping that quiet dedication would eventually be rewarded, can leave you vulnerable to those who operate by a different, more ruthless playbook. Rick fired me in a blatant display of dominance, believing he could erase my contributions and consolidate his control. He thought power was about intimidation, about making others feel small. But his actions, intended to break me, instead forced me to discover a different kind of power, the power of resilience, the power of strategic thinking, the power of building alliances based on mutual respect and shared vision, not fear. Real power isn't about controlling others, it's about unlocking potential, in yourself, in your team, in your organization. It's not about ego. It's about courage, clarity of purpose, and building something valuable that no single individual can easily steal or destroy. People, especially those comfortable within existing power structures, will inevitably underestimate those who challenge the status quo, those who don't fit the traditional mold of leadership. They will underestimate your resolve, your intellect, your ability to navigate complex challenges, your capacity to build coalitions and fight back. They will keep underestimating you, projecting their own limitations and biases onto you. Until, one day, they can't. Until the results are undeniable, the strategic position secured, the tables turned so definitively that underestimation is no longer possible. That is the moment when real change happens. My takeover of Innovate Solutions wasn't just about installing a new CEO. It was about fundamentally shifting the company culture. It was about proving that leadership driven by expertise, empathy, and a genuine commitment to collaborative success could outperform leadership driven by ego and insecurity. Rick tried to make an example of me to instill fear. I aimed to make Innovate Solutions an example of something entirely different, a place where talent is nurtured regardless of gender, where diverse perspectives are valued, and where the best ideas win, no matter who proposes them. It was about transforming a personal injustice into a catalyst for broader, positive change within the organization. The goal wasn't just to win the battle, but to change the landscape for the future. So, as you hear this story, as you reflect on the twists and turns, the betrayal and the ultimate triumph, let me ask you to turn the lens inward for a moment. Think about your own experiences, your own career, your own journey. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into a project, delivered exceptional results, only to be overlooked when credit was being handed out? Have you felt that sting of being underestimated, your ideas dismissed or glossed over in meetings, perhaps because your style was quieter, less self-promotional than others? Have you ever been talked down to, condescended to, made to feel small or less capable than you know you are, simply because you didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of what competence or authority looks like? Maybe it was subtle, the constant interruptions, the patronizing tone, the helpful advice that was actually diminishing. Or maybe it was blatant, like what I experienced. Have you ever felt pushed aside, marginalized, or penalized not because of the quality of your work, but because you refused to play the political games? Because you chose integrity over sycophancy? Because your very presence, your competence, inadvertently threatened someone else's fragile ego? Because you didn't conform to the unwritten rules dictated by the dominant group? Think about those moments. The moments of frustration, of injustice, of feeling unseen or unheard. The moments where you questioned yourself, perhaps even internalized the negativity directed at you. We've all faced setbacks, roadblocks, moments where the path forward seemed impossibly blocked by someone else's agenda or bias. But what if you reframed those experiences? What if that moment of profound disappointment, the one that felt like a definitive ending, the one clearly designed or destined to break your spirit, what if that wasn't an ending at all? What if, viewed from a different angle, it was actually a beginning in disguise? What if the rejection, the obstacle, the very act intended to diminish you, could be interpreted not as a verdict on your worth, but as a redirection? A forceful nudge away from a path that was perhaps too small for you anyway? What if the universe, in its sometimes brutal way, was slamming one door shut precisely to force you to notice another, wider door standing open just down the hallway? What if your biggest, most painful setback isn't a catastrophe, but a catalyst? What if the moment you feel most powerless is, in fact, the moment you are handed the raw materials, the anger, the resolve, the clarity, to build something far greater? What if that perceived failure is actually the critical turning point, the unexpected plot twist that unlocks the door to your next, most significant breakthrough? What possibilities emerge when you stop seeing it as a wall and start seeing it as a launching pad? Today, Innovate Solutions is unrecognizable from the company I was so unceremoniously ejected from. The fear that permeated the hallways under Rick's tenure has been replaced by a vibrant energy, a buzz of genuine collaboration. We operate on a fundamentally different kind of leadership model, one built on transparency, trust, and mutual respect. We actively solicit diverse perspectives, understanding that innovation thrives not in echo chambers, but in the fertile ground of varied experiences and constructive debate. We listen, truly listen, to our employees, our clients, our partners. We invest heavily in talent development, ensuring that people, especially women and those from underrepresented groups, are given not just opportunities, but the support and mentorship they need to rise and succeed on their own merits. Our bottom line reflects this transformation, but more importantly, our culture does. We are building the company Innovate Solutions always had the potential to be. As for Rick? Well, the corporate world can be small and whispers travel. The official line is that he left to pursue other opportunities, the standard euphemism for a forced departure. Last I heard through the grapevine, he was struggling to land a comparable leadership role, his reputation somewhat tarnished by the abrupt nature of his exit and the subsequent success of the company under new management. While a part of me might feel a flicker of grim satisfaction, honestly, his fate is peripheral to my focus now. I genuinely hope he learns something from the experience, finds a path that doesn't involve damaging others. But his journey is no longer intertwined with mine. My focus, my passion, is directed towards the future of Innovate Solutions, and more broadly, the future of anyone who has ever felt underestimated or sidelined. So, I wish you the best. Truly. Because the core message of my story isn't unique to me. It's a universal truth waiting to be activated. If someone, right now, is actively trying to dim your light, through criticism, exclusion, sabotage, or simply by failing to recognize your worth, do not let them succeed. Do not internalize their judgment. Do not shrink yourself to fit into the small boxes they try to build around you. Recognize their actions for what they often are, a reflection of their own insecurities, their own limitations, their own fear of your potential. Take your power back. It might not mean orchestrating a corporate takeover. The paths to reclaiming agency are diverse and personal. It might mean speaking up in meetings, seeking out mentors who believe in you, documenting your achievements meticulously, building skills independently, finding allies, or even making the brave decision to walk away from a toxic environment towards something healthier, something that values what you bring. Build your own table. If you're not being offered a seat at the table where decisions are made, don't just wait for an invitation that may never come. Create your own platform, your own network, your own venture, your own definition of success. Forge alliances with others who share your values and vision. Create spaces where competence is celebrated and collaboration thrives. And yes, if the opportunity arises, if the strategy is sound, and if the moment is right, don't hesitate to buy the whole damn building they once kicked you out of. Metaphorically or literally. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked something within you, a flicker of recognition, a surge of resolve, a new perspective on your own challenges, then please, engage with it. Like it, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And drop a comment below. Don't just tell me you were inspired, tell me one concrete step, however small, you plan to take this week to turn your own setback, past or present, into the foundation for your next comeback. Share your strength, share your intention. Because I promise you, with absolute certainty, your potential is immense, your resilience is deeper than you know, and your best chapter hasn't even started yet. Go write it.